Welcome to Entrepreneurial Reality with Bash. Every week we'll be speaking to startup and scale-up founders to learn about them, their ambitions for the business, goals and objectives. Every conversation is a moment in time, documenting entrepreneurs' current situation with a view to coming back next year to see how they are getting on. Each journey will be different. Each innovation could be game-changing. I hope you enjoy. So, Entrepreneurial Reality with Bash, Series 1, Episode 25. I have the co-founder and CEO of Thriva with me, Hamish Grierson. Welcome.
Great to talk to you, Ben. Looking forward to the conversation.
For the benefit of the listeners, could you give us a bit of background as to who you are? How did you become an entrepreneur?
Yeah, by all means. So I started Thriva about 3 years ago with my two other business partners, Tom and Elliot. I suppose I've sort of been in and around entrepreneurship and innovation for most of my working life. I started out at a university, having graduated with a degree in international politics, and then having decided that I didn't want to be in international politics, I basically got into broadcast media and sales and kind of mobile app development and the monetization of mobile apps. But I'd sort of fallen into that as a career. In my spare time, in my early 20s, I tried to create a business called EPOP, Electronic Proof of Purchase. Not exactly world's catchiest brand, I retrospectively realised. Trying to get rid of paper receipts that get spat out of till machines around the world, and learn the hard way that when you have no network, getting a business off the ground is very difficult. And ultimately, it didn't go anywhere. Then in my sort of mid-20s, my brother and my now wife created a business called Ski Neon, essentially ran ski holidays in the French Alps for a year, which was fantastic. It was a successful venture, but very, very difficult to scale. And I was lucky enough during that time to get onto a program called the New Entrepreneurs Foundation, which essentially sort of badges itself as an entrepreneurial MBA, and it places you in a host company. I was placed in a business called TravelX, which I was very, very lucky to find myself within for the simple reason that I was working with some of the brightest, most commercially astute people I think you probably can work with. The CEO, Peter Jackson, who's been a fantastic supporter and actually is an investor in Thriva, is now the CEO of Paddy Power Betfair. Tommy Jordan, who was my boss for a long time, went on to be the CEO of Wonga. And yeah, as I say, I was just very lucky to get exposed to some brilliant people. And whilst I was at TravelX, I met Elliot, one of the two guys that I mentioned. It just so happened that at the time, I'd become really, really fascinated by the amount of impact you can have on how you feel, how you look, just generally, I guess, how you think about the world as a consequence of taking some fairly simple decisions about what you eat and how much exercise you do. That curiosity and passion essentially collided with a conversation that Elliot and I were having fairly frequently about blood testing. We were talking about blood testing because he has a genetic condition, familial hypercholesterolemia, that means that every 3 or 4 months he was off down to his GP to go and get a blood test done to monitor his cholesterol levels. I'd, fairly frequently, partly in jest, poke him in the ribs and ask him whether he'd ever sort of experimented with managing his condition a different way. It transpired that he didn't actually have any of his own data. It would live, as it does tend to, with his doctors in a file that he didn't have access to. The more the two of us sort of picked at why it was that was the case, the more fascinated we became by this idea that we were living in an interesting time where consumer-led innovation and proactive well-being were being adopted en masse in a whole variety of sectors that we were operating within, and also adjacent sectors. So, in financial services, the neobanks had started creating challenger products that put people at the center of the products and services that they were building and empowering them with information, not treating them like kind of victims of the service. Within the health realm, there was certainly proof positive that people were starting to themselves with information about what's going on inside their bodies, and using fitness and tracking products to start trying to quantify the world around them, as well as some of their activity and sleep patterns and things like that. And yet there just seemed to be this massively blank part of the sort of data equation, which is, well, what's actually happening inside your body? Given actually what's happening inside your body is pretty dynamic, it isn't impossible to understand. We have and have had tools available to track and to understand what's happening inside ourselves. It's just that it's a little bit more difficult to get at. That was the genesis for the idea of Thriva. Yeah, that's where it all came from.
You're here and now, gone through some funding already. Correct me if I'm wrong, it's about 1.5 million you have raised.
Yes, we've raised actually about 2.7. There was another round that wasn't announced that we did in January of last year. To bring it up to date, we're in the process of rounding out our, I guess you'd call it our Series A, and that will be an additional somewhere between 3.5 and 4.5 million. We've got committed a 3.5 at term sheet level, and we've already done a first close of 1.3 of that. So we're in the process of trying to round that out, and we ought to be all wrapped up by the end of February.
How did you cope with that process? Have you gone through that before in a previous company?
No, first time raising money from the equity markets. I did it at Thriva. It has been, when you look at what you think a startup journey could be like, generally speaking, the literature is quite consistent. If you build something that people buy, and they buy relatively in large numbers, you will be able to raise money. And our journey hasn't been like that at all, really, in that, and I take a huge amount of responsibility for this, we have found it very difficult to raise money. We, I think, just assumed that, when you get to the standard Series A metrics and indeed the seed metrics prior to that, that you'd be able to walk in the door, relatively straightforwardly and raise money from investors, who need to place their money to work. And though we have gotten there, and I'm very lucky to say that we've got some fantastic investors on our cap table, from Alex Chesterman, founder of Love Film, founder of Zoopla, now the founder of Kazoo, Simon Franks, another Love Film founder, Paul Forster, the founder of Indeed, Tava Hinrichs, the founder of TransferWise, Ajit Berg, the founder of HealthScribe. We've just we've kind of gone down the the angel-led route, but that in tandem had us go through a whole series of conversations with all of the VCs that I'm sure anyone listening to this podcast will know and understand. Yeah, it's just been very difficult, and some of that was, I'm sure, because we are first-time founders. Some of that was because we are in a fairly new investment space. Consumer-led health is just fairly new. Yeah, I don't know what else to tell you. It was just difficult, and clearly we weren't telling the story in quite the right way. Now I think, fast forward 3 years, we're getting much better at understanding how to communicate why this is such an exciting business and place to be in. But it's taken a lot of knocks to get there.
I myself am an angel investor, and part of the reason why I pick and approach certain entrepreneurs to contribute on this platform is to do with the understanding of future growth markets, the understanding of new innovations that are coming to market that you can see massive upside in the long term. You mentioned the wearables that are monitoring the output of your exercise, impact on blood pressure potentially, etc. You mentioned blood testing as a way to give some further insight into your current and potential future state. With the blood samples, how do you go about accessing that information to then provide feedback to your customers?
Yeah, that's a good question. And, I think just for the sake of 2 seconds of context, that's exactly right. We have seen proactive wellbeing paid for and adopted en masse across financial, mental well-being, and activity or fitness well-being promotion. And we really see the internal elements of that being the last, or at least next, to bounce the ball. So to answer your question directly, because you can now analyze accurately someone's blood, but having collected a significantly smaller quantity of that person's blood, there is I guess a bit of a revolution unfolding in that with a finger prick lancet and a small tube, a little thing called a microtoner or a nanotoner, you're able to collect say 12 to 15 droplets of someone's blood that they can do at home unassisted, and that is then free posted back to a laboratory, themselves tier 1 UCAS accredited, the same labs that be running your tests if you went to an NHS doctor probably. We very simply have a secure integration with the lab and receive back the raw form of the data, and it's from there really that Thriva takes over. It's everything from the way in which we present the data back to people through to enabling people to personalize what it is that they're testing in order to build up a very relevant picture of their health. So to put a little bit of color on that, we have developed algorithms that look at the test results as well as what we know to be your health priority. And we can say, okay, well, looking at the latest research, and we obviously enable people to click out and read the research themselves, we can see that there is logic to maybe not testing whatever this particular biomarker was that you were testing before because it looks like it's fine. But if appropriate, you might want to add in something else to that testing mix. I guess to give you a couple of examples of that, if we've seen that there is an elevated lipids panel, a cholesterol panel, the research tends to suggest now quite clearly that if you look at inflammation in tandem with cholesterol, actually get a much more accurate read on cardiovascular disease risk in the long term. So we let people add in something called C-reactive protein, which lets you look at inflammation levels or high sensitivity C-reactive protein. So, it's just about intelligently using the information to try to add more and more value to people over time.
You mentioned SaaS, B2B, B2B2C. Is it a subscription model that you're providing, or is it a pay per test?
Sure. So Thriva's business model is fairly straightforward in that the biggest part of what we do is a direct to consumer subscription product. It's a little unusual in that you currently pay per test that we provide, and you can control the timing of when those tests arrive. So you can make it monthly or annually, whatever suits you. But it is a tracking product at its heart. We understand that people take the most amount of value from it when they're able to see their own trend lines. So yeah, that's certainly the mainstay of what we do. Now we do also have other elements to the business. So we have launched a supplements range because we want to be able to help solve the problems that we identify. So we think we have launched, if not the highest caliber, then certainly one of the highest caliber supplements ranges in the UK, because quality we think is essentially the only thing that matters when you're thinking about supplements. And we have other arms to the business. So I alluded to the relationship we have with the Royal Brompton Hospital, and that is a B2B2C play, if you like. It's about empowering specialists to offer their patients or clients testing using our software and our lab relationships. Now, through that lens, we also have a network that we've largely organically acquired of about 500 private practitioners who use Thriva with their clients. It isn't the mainstay of our focus right now, but certainly is something that in the future might become an area that we seek to try and better understand and ultimately grow as a consequence.
You mentioned biomarkers. For us that are not so medical orientated, could you just describe what a biomarker is?
When we think about providing you with information about what's happening inside your body, people describe the things that you measure in a variety of ways. A biomarker, so far as we have understood its definition, describes a particular area of testing. So as an example, cholesterol might be considered a biomarker. To other people, LDL cholesterol might be considered a biomarker. So yeah, it's not a particularly good definition, but what I really mean is the list of things that you might want to test or are testing, be that something like HbA1c, which is a marker for prediabetes and diabetes, through to your thyroid function, which looks at a combination of elements that might reveal whether your thyroid's functioning effectively or not.
Closing off your Series A funding, just out of interest, where are you going to be investing that money in the business?
Capital raise is really to, and this sounds flippant, but I certainly don't mean it to be, do more of the same. And what I mean by that is invest heavily in increasing the quality of the product that we're able to offer people. So as an example, we now let people customize the test that they start with. It is a tracking product, so we want to enable people to track the things that are most important to them. And if we know, for example, that you're trying to look at fertility as your health priority, the way that we interpret your results actually ought to reflect the fact that we know your primary focus is around fertility. So we have created and are in the process of building into the product an internal platform called DocChain, which enables us to provide contextually relevant results. And part of that information obviously is actually how might you effectively continue to tailor your testing, but also just being aware of what the priority was in the first place, and the way that we tell you what matters will help you understand what might matter. So yeah, increasing the product and then also helping people find it. So marketing in its various forms. The other things that we probably haven't done to date that we're obviously looking at are international, thinking about whether we're going to take a similar product to the one we have in the UK to other markets, or whether there's opportunity to take a slightly different operational model to other markets, or actually whether we look domestically expanding into other areas that are relevant for the business, whether that's trying to find other areas of utility within the NHS that we can help with. We have a live pilot with the Royal Brompton Hospital helping cystic fibrosis patients test at home using a B2B2C platform that we created called Thriva for Specialists. Equally, it might be that the clinical trials realm, which struggles with trial participant retention, often because the testing burden is very heavy, might be an area that we could help with. Yeah, so we have some strategic thinking to process as to where and what we do next.
There's a proliferation of doctors via the mobile phone, Push Doctor, Babylon Health, etc. So there may be an opportunity for partnerships to complement their initial service to explore. I'm just speculating here.
Yeah, no, you're right. We have spoken to all of the telemedicine providers in the UK, and I think it's probably fair to say that testing is core to our business and it's not core to theirs necessarily. And one of the product options that we have is essentially creating a virtual plug and play laboratory solution for third parties that want to do testing. You could almost think of it as a Twilio for testing, but it's complicated to build, and that comes at the altar of doing other things at the kind of quality that we hold ourselves accountable to. So yeah, no, for sure, absolutely, an accurate observation, I would say.
And over the course of the years of working, building businesses, and then going into Thriva, raising funding, what lesson or lessons that you've learned that you could share with the listeners?
I guess I'd have a couple. The first is I'm not a developer, and I struggled for many years with the idea that you had to be able to build something in order to start something. So how can you possibly validate something, go and raise money or attract talent to join you without this thing? And I think that feeling is spurred on because you can't build it yourself. So it feels like this immutable object that you have to somehow get past. I would say in nearly every single instance where someone is considering an innovation, that's just not true. There are now tools, most of which are free, but more importantly, there are conversations that you can have. If I could have my time again in any business, really, I would start with the principles outlined in frameworks like Jobs to be Done, using some of the concepts and frameworks in This is Marketing, Seth Godin's latest book, and just try to understand a problem in significantly higher fidelity than I think most people actually do before they start putting spades in the ground. So that'd be thing one. I think thing two, partly as a consequence of having to think laterally about fundraising and the fundraising environments that dominate most developed geographies. I guess I've developed a view of venture capital that I certainly didn't have before. And I think, put crudely, because most of the discourse in venture and innovation, those two things are often seen as the same thing, essentially created and propagated by the people who run VCs and the businesses that succeed that come out of VCs. The view, I think, held by many startup founders, incorrectly, I think, if you actually look at the data, is that you are necessarily sitting on a business that has to be able to scale or shouldn't be started, and that you should be trying to essentially build $1 billion business from day one. If you look at the success rates of venture capital as an asset class, and I haven't looked at the data in detail, but I've talked to a couple of guys who certainly have, it just, unfortunately, as a model, doesn't seem to really make much sense. And the 1 in 10 rocket ship success and the 2 in 20 commercial models that many of these funds subscribe to just, don't really make much sense to me. Now, at a very personal level, I obviously get to talk to lots of other startup founders, and my number one question for them when they're thinking about raising money and scaling is, what actually do you want here? Because if you are looking at learning and trying to de-risk the chances of failure, actually, signing yourself up to the roller coaster that is a venture capital rocket ship, it very much isn't the only option, and very much is a pretty formulaic equation should you end up on that roller coaster. And there are some businesses that 100% should be galloping at trying to raise venture capital from all of the household VC names that we know and love. Software, high margin, zero handbrake to adoption style businesses, I think tend to fare much better in that regard. So yeah, as I say, I'm not down on VC as an asset class. I just think my lesson is that I would have hoped, should I have my time again, that I'd be able to think about funding and growth through a slightly more informed perspective.
You mentioned a book, Seth Godin, This is Marketing. Are there any others that you are reading at the moment that you can share, or any others that you'd recommend to other entrepreneurs on a similar path to yourself?
I'd very highly recommend This is Marketing. Very, very highly recommend This is Marketing. I read a lot of literature that's focused on trying to unpick why people do things. Whether that's sapiens, thinking about, human beings evolving as animals, all the way through to contagious or hooked or, businesses around habit formation. And I think Seth Godin has managed to distill a truth of human reality into an incredibly simple form. And it feels like if you can do the hard yards in unpacking what that means for your business, there's a little bit of a secret in there for any business. So I really, really highly recommend it. And it forces or reforces, if you've drifted away from it, an unrelenting focus on whose problem are you looking to solve, and how do you understand that person's worldview such that you might find a way to be useful to them. Yeah, so really, really highly recommend it. And I'm also in the process of reading a book called How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. This is completely off topic, in some senses only not off topic because it's to do with health and particularly mental health. And it's really a bit of a deep dive into psychedelics, the background on them as a class of molecules. Yeah, it's just very eye-opening. you kind of slightly tongue-in-cheek read about the fact that Steve Jobs classed his LSD or acid trips as some of the most important things that he has done. And I have to confess, I've just never really engaged with that as a topic of conversation particularly. And it's just really interesting. I think it's something that most people would probably find quite fascinating.
I prefer to read about it than experience it personally.
Yeah, I think this is it. And it's, I think most people probably fall into that category, but not necessarily for the right reasons, actually. And I think that's what surprised me. I think, I've long been of a similar viewpoint. And it's, from an education perspective, it sort of turns on its head a lot of the heuristics I think most people hold to be true. So, if you've got an inquiring mind, I just think it's an interesting read.
Well, have a look at it. So talking about the mind and psychedelics, I'm always interested in about the balance of building a business, the time and pressures you face as you grow and scale. You're taking on money from the investors and they have certain expectations of you. How do you go about getting their headspace away from the madding crowd, as it were?
Well, well put. I think that's an apposite description, Ben. I'm very lucky. I've got an amazing wife, and I've got 2 young kids. One who's 3.5, Kit, and Hector, who's about 11 weeks old. And I'm not going to pretend that this is a sort of a break in energy terms, because they are kind of always on as a thing, but they are amazing in their ability to just suck you into their world. And it takes a little bit of time to sort of be present and forget that there's this other kind of vortex spinning nearby that is your startup. But time with them is more often than it isn't just a fantastic pressure valve. With them and my wife, family life for me is a really important part. Equally, I am a fairly big believer, and I have to confess, I've completely retrospectively fitted what I'm about to say to my life. I'm a big believer in, I think it was Tony Robbins or Tim Ferriss or someone who said, stay in your head, you're dead. And actually just doing physical things with your body to try and get away from what might have become a slightly frustrated mind state. Things like riding my motorbike, riding my bicycle, kite surfing, skiing, just things that give you a bit of an adrenaline boost. I kind of think about exercise, whether it's a few push-ups and sit-ups here and there, or a cold shower in the morning. That kind of stuff is really just about my head. I mean, yes, okay, fine. It's nice to feel a bit stronger, but it forces your brain to do something that it wouldn't unless you did those things. Yeah, so I'd say amongst all of that, just about managed to stay on an even keel.
Good. It's good to hear. We've covered off a lot of ground. It's amazing how quickly time flies when talking about a business that you're passionate about, the idea, the innovation. There's a question I would like to ask every entrepreneur. What would you do differently knowing what you know now?
So let me go slightly back to front on this answer. And by the way, I genuinely think Thriva is a business that has the ability, as in just part of its DNA, pun not intended, to become a genuinely game-changing global brand. I think it does have that about it. That notwithstanding, going back to, I guess what I've learned about funding and venture, I increasingly subscribe to the view that actually the businesses that win in the sort of big headlines in the media kind of win are businesses that foundationally are alive. The businesses that win big, Facebook's, Google's, big tech companies that we know and love, happen to catch a rising tide. And, Facebook wasn't the only business of its kind providing social communication for campuses in the States when Facebook took off like a rocket. There was a moment in time that propelled it happened to be Facebook, but it was going to be a business into the stratosphere. Now, if they had been sitting at the wrong point in time by 5 years, maybe it would have been a different story, should they have died. But the businesses that win are, as I say, foundationally businesses that are alive to, if you like, surf the tides, whether they rise or fall. And therefore, I would invite myself to think about how to structure growth of all kinds through that lens, and to find backers that see that while we are looking to build a dominant global brand, that the method of growth, perhaps in particular because it's health, should be thought about in a different way to, a B2B SaaS product, as an example. So yeah, I'd like to think of myself as teaching a lesson that will just help me think more clearly, I guess.
Is there anything that you would like to share with the audience? Any sort of leaving comment?
Yeah, I guess the big one for me is I always am fascinated by people's personal thoughts or relationships with health. Health in theory impacts everybody. I think, I'm just always fascinated to know how people think about their health. What is their priority? How would they see a better version of themselves if indeed they do? What are their questions? What are their concerns? So I'm open to a dialogue with anyone who's prepared to share their thoughts. And of course, if anyone would ever like to give Thriva a go, I'm sure I can provide you with a code to add in, Ben. And yeah, by all means, have a go. Let us know what you think.
And so they can find you at?
They can find me personally at hamish@thriva.co. And Thriva, the website is just thriva.co. That's THRIVA, thriva.co.
Fantastic.
So what do you think? We'll have another interesting story to dive into next week. Looking forward to it already. Some questions to you in the meantime. What is your story? What is your reality right now? And what are you working towards? Let me know. So you can connect with me on Twitter. Just type in Bash in the search and you'll find me. So Bash, BASH, easy. On Instagram, it's Bash Reality. So that's Bash_reality. And on LinkedIn, Benjamin Ashmore. Make sure you subscribe, and until next week, cheers.
The podcast you just heard was made using Anchor. Ever thought about making your own podcast? Anchor makes it really easy for anyone to get started. It's a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing podcasts. Best of all, it's 100% free. Sign up now at anchor.fm/new. That's anchor.fm/new to get started.